Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story.
Welcome to The Other Side. I'm here with my colleague, Jeff Pender. Jeff, how you doing, man?
Hey, Bobby.
Good to see you outside of the legislative session.
Right.
We're still talking about politics in a sense, but we're going to kind of talk a little history today. We're pleased to have with us, Jeff, retired U.S. bankruptcy judge Ed Ellington. Sir, Judge, how you doing?
Good morning. Doing fine.
Well, thanks for doing this. We're excited about it. And Judge, what we want to talk to you about several things, but we want to start off Hob Bryan, State Senator Hob Bryan from Amory actually recommended you for for this podcast. So he told me your story. We thought it was a great story. So you can blame Hob for us calling and bothering you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hob.
But what we want to talk first about, Judge, is I guess we should have waited 2 years, but we couldn't wait that long. But in March of 66 will be the 60th anniversary in 2 years. Gosh, we're getting old. You played a pivotal role in responsible for having Robert Kennedy, former U.S. attorney, U.S. senator from New York, and of course a historical figure of some note. You were responsible for having him speak at University of Mississippi. And that in itself doesn't sound that controversial, but at the time it was very controversial, Judge. It was less than 4 years after the riots with the integration of Ole Miss, and so we just wanted you to talk some about the story behind that, and also Jeff and I were looking. We found a transcript online recently, and it starts out with you introducing Bobby Kennedy, and I don't know if you remember that introduction, but you referenced some of the struggles that went into that invitation and him speaking at Ole Miss. But just tell us what you remember about that.
Well, let me say to start with, anything I say today, if anybody else says that's wrong, they're probably right. I can't remember 58 years ago very much, and I wouldn't argue about it. But this is best I remember, and I'm sure there are a lot of gaps in it and some outright errors. So anyway, as you know, the thing that made his speech noteworthy were the riots themselves in fall of 1962. And I happened to, I graduated from Mississippi State in the spring and went in the Army in January. And in September of that fall is when the riots happened. I was not there, but I watched it on black and white TV, and I just thought it was horrible that it came to that. Mississippi, as you know, had been fighting on all fronts on segregation and integration. But to me, the time had finally come to admit that we had to that old state of Mississippi lost, and integration was going to happen. But the riots happened, and that's a whole other story. And I hope don't let me stay on it too long. But anyway, the Fifth Circuit, and I guess Supreme Court backed them up, ordered Mississippi to allow a black student to enter Ole Miss on a certain Monday. Well, that weekend, there'd been a big Ole Miss football game in Jackson, and Ross Barnett, one more time, who had led the fight, appeared before that, got the students all pumped up. They went back home, and then the riots happened that Monday morning. And if you ever see it on TV, you just can't believe what happened with burning cars and bricks having been thrown and the whole place trashed up. And it was all on national TV. Everything was covered on national TV.
And just there was 2 fatalities. I think that's right.
Yeah, that was admitted. There was some question about the U.S. Marshals that got injured there, but they never really released any figures on that I know of. But it was beyond a protest. I mean, it was outright war. And then Ross Barnett was the governor, and he was, in my opinion, using it pure political purposes and did not try to manage it at all, and just pulled off the highway patrol, and what happened happened. And so, and I was in the Army, and I thought to myself, if I could ever do anything about that, I would, thinking I never would be able to. But anyway, I got out, came back to law school in the fall of '64, and we had a speakers bureau at that time, and just regular lawyers would come in and speak to us sometime. But in the fall of, I guess, the summer of '65, Gerald Blassie, who was from Biloxi, and Cleve Donald, who was a black young man, were at the Young Democrats Convention in Washington, and skipping over a lot. But anyway, they met with Robert Kennedy, who had been blamed for the riot because he was the Attorney General and was cutting edge on the integration. And they met with him and found out that they asked him about when he come speak to the University of Mississippi in his law school. He said he was willing to do it. So everybody's surprised, because there had been rumors that there were tapes made between Ross Barnett and him leading up to the riots, and he was under the impression that Ross Barnett and the Highway Patrol and stuff was going to, maintain order, and that didn't happen. And so he agreed to come, but we knew it. I didn't know anything about it at the time, but Bob Montgomery from Canton, who had been friends of mine in the state, was president of the student body, and he named me head of the Speakers Bureau, which is like 8 or 9 law students that would select speakers. And I presented to them, and Gerald spoke, and anyway, they agreed for the Speakers Bureau to invite Robert Kennedy to come speak. Well, we knew it was going to be an uproar that young people now couldn't believe what it was like, but we knew it was going to be all kinds of harsh criticisms and pressures on the university. But anyway, we kind of kept it to ourselves until I got a call in January from Commercial Appeal reporter asking me if it was true, and I said, well, and I knew her well. I said, let me go talk to the dean and see if I have his blessing to go ahead and release it. And the dean was Dean Josh Morris, who was from Pearl River County, and he had been made dean in a way because they didn't trust the old dean, Robert Farley, thought he was too liberal, so they thought a proven man from Pearl River County to be the dean.
I'm with you on the other
story. And so he told me, yeah, go ahead and break it. So I told Betty Simmons at the time, Mary Grady Jolly later, and she put it in the Commercial Appeal. The legislature was in session, and of course, it just blew up in the legislature, and they ready to jerk all the funding from Ole Miss and everything else. And so from the time that it became public in January of '66 up until the speech itself in March of '66, it was just constant uproar over the fact he was coming. So many of the old, voters, old line true segregationists and everything else just thought it was horrible that the man that integrated Ole Miss at gunpoint, you might say, was going to be allowed to speak. They didn't like the idea it was coming. And then a lot of the parents didn't like the idea that their young children at Ole Miss were going to be exposed to hear someone like Robert Kennedy speak. So it was an ongoing thing, and it was tremendous pressure, I do believe, no, it's fact, on the chancellor and the administration, the board of trustees, the institution of higher learning to withdraw, have the invitation withdrawn. And they summoned me over. I signed the invitation inviting him to speak, but it wasn't just me. It was the Speakers Bureau itself voted to do it. So I went over there, and before I got there, I decided I was not going to do it. So I got there with the administration people, and they asked me, what do you think about this? What's going to hurt the university's funding, this, that, and other. And I didn't get in an argument about it. I said, that's not my problem, that's yours. But I'm not withdrawing it. And if anybody could have done it, Josh Morris, the dean, could have compelled me to do it, but he stood strong. I never talked to him directly about it, but I think he was involved. He was summoned over there to have it withdrawn, and he wouldn't do it. And I think both of us, on my side and his, felt like we were not going to do it. And we felt like the university was not going to do it because I think they felt the university was so close to having their accreditation withdrawn after the riot, they were not going to risk losing their accreditation over not letting a United States Senator from New York speak on the campus. So we felt like we pretty well had them there. So, okay, so the first thing they did then to make the parents feel better about it, they came out and said, well, the university said, well, he can speak here, but it's going to be in the auditorium where they have stage plays and stuff. And only law students and their wives and I believe law school faculty, they're the only ones who can see it. The students here and so forth cannot be admitted. Well, that really worked in our favor because then the students and the faculty, undergraduate faculty, really got teed off because they were going to be prohibited from hearing what he had to say. Because a lot of them, not so much the students, but some, but faculty in particular, they had been there for the riot themselves. They were real interested what led up to it and wanted to hear what Kennedy had to say. So then the administration really had that pressure on them, and it just stayed there. And then, that's thousands of people that wanted to get into hearing. So about 3 days before the speech itself, the administration finally relented and allowed us to have the speech in the new basketball coliseum. So that's where it wound up. That's how it wound up, being available to the public, you might say. And then you can't believe the coverage that day. There was like the Boston Globe, New York Times, LA Times, Chicago, all the big cities newspapers, which were really, really, really big at that time, and also ABC, NBC, all there covering it that day. And so, quite frankly, I think all of us on the committee we were scared in the sense we didn't know what was going to happen that day too. It could have had people come in. There were some bad guys wandering around then with guns and dynamite and everything else. And so we didn't know whether it was going to be another riot or not.
Judge, you just touched on something I was wondering if we can back up a second now. I know you said you had served in the military, but you're at this point a young guy, college student, law school student, and it sounds like you fully knew when you helped get this rolling that it was going to be the controversy it was, or did you realize how big a deal this was going to be nationally even?
No, I did not. As you said, I knew it was going to be big news in Mississippi and be a lot of controversy, but I didn't realize the extent to which it would attract national attention. And it was covered pretty good nationally leading up to the day of the speech, but the day of the speech and the day or two before. I was just amazed at the coverage and that came out in the papers after it, which turned out to be favorable to my experience. But anyway, it was like the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Chicago Tribune, if that's the right name, the LA Times, and a lot of other smaller regional things were all there. And then all the major TV networks covered it.
Wow.
And then what you didn't know is you were not a parent is you can't believe how many law enforcement people were there that day around the campus itself. But then in the audience itself, there were a lot of armed people, not in uniform, but just you never knew who was going to come in or what they were going to do. So, and then the crowd itself, never expected it when we started, but the crowd itself inside the Coliseum of the students and the faculty and so forth, it was several thousand people and happened that day. So, yes, I was surprised at the coverage it got, but we really did get good coverages following days about how well it was presented and how well the students were toward the Senate and so forth. And if whenever you want me to, I'd like to comment on his appearance and what happened at that time.
Oh, sure, sure.
But real quick before we do that, let's the legislature was upset about it. They threatened to cut off funding to Ole Miss. Was it actually have any repercussions from state officials that actually happened? Did they at least pass a resolution condemning you or anything like that?
I'm not aware that they ever suffered any cut in funding for Ole Miss because or any of the other schools, because Ole Miss, regardless of what happened, they still had a lot of sway in the legislature keeping the school funded. And a lot of that big talk was just big talk. They could make it big talk to home folks, but I don't think any of them really want to take on trying to cut Ole Miss's fund, to tell you the truth about it.
So let's see, by 66 was the governor was it still Barnett or was it John Bell Williams?
I believe it was John Bell Williams.
Yeah. So I guess he stayed quiet for the most part.
Yeah, but I do believe. I mean, we had other speakers. You had other speakers, and I believe he came up and spoke one time because one of his right-hand guys that I knew well was Jack Shearer, who was in the newspaper business and I was from Lexington. He had been down at the paper in Lexington. I believe they were together. And he came up and spoke one day.
Yeah. Well,
let's get off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about this. I mean, the speech and how it was received and what your impressions. And were you and you were, I guess, in your early to mid 20s. You introduced him before these thousands of people. Were you nervous at that time?
Well, yeah. I guess anybody would have been nervous, but two or three things. This is injecting in there. Well, I'll get back to it in a minute. There is if anybody's really interested in it, Gerald Blessed, who was the moving person as much as anybody getting Kennedy to come, his daughter, Mary Blessed, has made a film of the whole thing that's available, and I think it's also in Ole Miss Library. And I saw the film itself at Ole Miss a couple of years ago for Law Weekend up there. But if anybody's really interested in it, they ought to try to get it.
Yeah, we'll try and put a link to that actually in our podcast intro.
Yeah, and I can give you Gerald's number if you want to when this is over.
Sure. I've got his number. I worked for the Biloxi Sun-Herald for almost 20 years. I know former Mayor Blessey well.
I called him last night to check some of the facts, and if you have facts nowadays, anyway, you got to go over it.
Well, Judge,
Mary did a really good job on the film.
Yeah. Judge, we don't have the film right here in front of us, but we got a transcript, and a couple of things struck me. One of them was your introduction. You reminded people, hey, free speech and all. You know, we want to allow, you know, all kinds of voices to be heard. Kind of a plea reminding people that, you know, it's a free country and we have freedom of speech and all voices ought to be heard. Was that kind of your intro theme?
It was, because going on back, I don't know if you have read, I never read the whole book, but there was a book, Mississippi, The Closed Society, that was written by Dr. Silver at Ole Miss, talking about how Mississippi was closed society. And of course, he got a lot of criticism and was used just of horror to so many Mississippians about what he said. But I wasn't close friends with him, but I knew him because he kind of was one of the sponsors of ODK, and I was in it and for luncheons, and I'd met him. And so I had that on my mind, and I knew it fell my duty to introduce Robert Kennedy. But you didn't need to go through normal types about where he went to school and where offices he held. That wasn't the problem. And I felt I needed to do something that would call out the best in the students. And at that time, as you know, but others might not, the most dogmatic segregationist was the governor of Alabama. Give me his name real quick.
George Wallace.
Yeah, Wallace. And he had been invited to speak at Yale. And as I said, protest arose from people at Yale, and the invitation was withdrawn. And I didn't like the governor, but I really did think that was wrong, that he should have been allowed to speak. So I just went over the fact he had been invited to speak, protest arose, the invitation was withdrawn. But I said, that's not our nature. And after the day, never again let it be said that Ole Miss is a closed society. And it just turned the kids, students and people their own. And so that was the introduction. And backing up, when we came in to the Coliseum that day to go up on the lectern, for podium and for the lectern, when Kennedy walked in, the kids just voluntarily all stood up and applauded him, to everybody's great surprise, but happiness.
Wow.
And then later on, when I introduced him, they gave him another standing ovation when he was introduced. And then backing up a little bit, when I and some others met him at the airport, there were a lot of kids out there that day on chain link fence just to see him when he got off the plane and, shook hands with him. And then he and his wife and some of his entourage, we went on to the alumni house where we had fixed up lunch for them before the speaking, which I guess probably around 2. And he and his wife, Ethel, were right across the table from me, and he asked me what the kids were interested in. I said, well, of course, he had made some controversial comments about maybe providing some blood to North Vietnam or something like that. But I said, of course, what they really want to know is what was the deal between you and the governor at the time of the forced integration. And so we didn't go over it. I just said, that's what they're interested in. Well, we had, and he gave about a 20-minute speech of general nature, but everybody was just waiting for the part they were interested in. Finally, he got to that point, and I think I announced, I asked if there were any questions. And we'd gotten one of our law students, Frank Thaxton, I believe it was, had gotten him to stand up to be recognized, to ask about what actually transpired. And so Kennedy then went on to write a very detailed description about how he and Jack Kennedy had tried to get the governor to do this, that, and the other. And the governor, Barnett, was reassuring him, everything's going to work out. We're going to do this, that, and the other. But he needed some help on him. And the only laugh I heard that day really was when Kennedy told about Ross Barnett wanted them to have the marshals pull their gun and put the guns on him and force him to agree to let them in. They said, "No, we're not doing that." And but anyway, it was finally over, and it seemed like everybody there felt good about the way. I mean, the Mississippi people felt really good about how it had come off. And then there was real good coverage in the national press and TV and everything else for several days. And until I had 2 footnotes, over the years, my lifetime, I don't mean every year this happened, but many times over the years, guys a few years younger than I am, went back doing whatever they did. But anyway, they tell me when I run into them from time to time how much that speech and that appearance that they had meant to them. And then when Ted Kennedy was running for president, Ethel and her daughter, and Bobby Kennedy had been killed by that time. Bobby, she came to Mississippi for 2 or 3 days on behalf of Ted Kennedy, and I believe it was Brad Dye knew them from his time working for Eastland, and he took my wife Cleta and I out to meet with them at the motel they were staying at, and she told us at that time, said Robert Kennedy had spoken all over the world, and he had. And she said, no telling how many speeches he made, but he said the only 2 I ever heard him bring up on his own and talk about them was the one other in the Ole Miss speech. So anyway, I guess it all worked out.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize. I mean, I read his speech that you can find online. I didn't know about the film, but so you saying at the end of the speech, he kind of referenced, but he didn't really talk about what happened in '62. But after the speech, he took questions from the crowd, from the audience. Is that, and that's when he was asked about what happened in '62. Is that, am I correct about that?
Yeah. His first speech is he got up and said he was glad to be there and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
He talked about, serving the country or something, just normal political speech.
Judge, looking at his speech and everything, a couple of things struck me, but one was maybe his sense of humor and how he kind of broke the ice. Looking back at his speech, he said he thanked you for helping set this up and others, and he said, quote, "I've heard a great deal about the University of Mississippi, so I was anxious to come. I can only imagine." He said, "I was grateful to your warm reception to us." He said, "I know that there was some controversy about my coming, and somebody down here suggested that it was like putting a fox in the chicken house." He said, "But elsewhere, some of my friends said it was like putting a chicken in a fox house." But, and he also, I guess he went on from there. He quoted Lord Bismarck, or paraphrased him. He once said, "The students of Germany and looking out," he was speaking to the students of Germany and looking out at them. He said, "A third of the students will die from overwork, a third of them die from dissipation and too much drink, and a third of them go on to be the rulers of Germany." And then Kennedy said, "Well, looking out at this student body, I can see what third came here today." He didn't go on to say which third he thought it was, but I thought that was kind of funny and maybe a good way to break the ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Regardless of what
he really.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, he really did break the ice well, but then he went in. I think he had some nervousness about it because he had some reasons to feel bad about how the integration day itself transpired, because if he had to do it over again, they might have sent in the 101st Airborne before the integration rather than after the integration. They tried to, this is a whole other thing, speculation, and I wasn't there. but they tried not to look like they were being so heavy-handed about the integration. They had U.S. Marshals there, but there wasn't any great strength. But after the riots, of course, they were compelled to send in the 101st Airborne, a part of the 101st Airborne Division out of Fort Knox, and they stayed there for a year or two to keep the peace. So that's one of the things that the university had so much to regret. You run a university that has to be occupied by the airborne to keep the peace. That doesn't sound too good for the university side.
Yeah, we're getting off topic, but just off the top of my head, I think this is correct. Robert Kennedy's brother, of course, John Kennedy, the president, I think went on TV at one point and thanked Mississippi for working with him to integrate Ole Miss. And he found, because I guess communications wasn't quite then what it is today, and then he found out, well, that wasn't happening.
Yeah. But I mean, y'all can read what Robert Kennedy said about it, but Barnett, they couldn't ever pin him down.
Yeah.
On it,
Judge, you've touched on it several times, and but I think maybe for our audience, a lot of whom at least were either not born or not aware at the time, some of our audience, how divided things were in this country at the time, and maybe we could relate to that a little bit today. It seems like maybe we're in a somewhat similar situation, but back then we were starting to get politically divided, and even more divisiveness was on its way in short order. Can you speak to that a little bit? Just how things were at the time, politically and socially?
I can just comment some. I certainly can't do justice to it. Everybody had their own opinion, but up till, I guess, we didn't just rush into Vietnam. We kind of kept thinking we couldn't get out of it. We kept getting in. When the French pulled out, and then we were thinking that the communists were going to occupy Vietnam, and we were fighting to try to hold back communism in that part of the country. And we got a hook hung, and rather than deciding to get out, Lyndon Johnson in particular seemed like, from what I don't know, but what I read, he was just not going to ever be president of the United States that lost the war.
Yeah.
And so he and McNamara just kept on sending more and more troops and more this, that, and the other. And at that time, young men were subject to the draft. And so the draft was in effect, and so you weren't having volunteers go over there. You were having people of all types that were being sent to Vietnam to maybe get killed over Vietnam. And there was a real tear between that. And then at the same time, the President of the United States was faced with all the divisiveness over segregation and integration. The blacks were pushing real hard to get equal treatment, and a lot of the white states, in particular, across the Southeast, were fighting it. And then even parts of the country, they weren't really helping out that much. So it was just so many things. But the Vietnam alone was enough to rupture a company. And
in 66, it's starting to ramp up, right? We're putting in more and more troops.
Yeah, I forgot exactly. I remember it clearly when Lyndon Johnson came on TV. I was, as I said, a lot of us had been through 4 years and decided that we were going to be in ROTC. We stayed in advanced ROTC and were commissioned as second lieutenants when we got out, and then we went in the Army. And then we served 2 or 3 years. And then we came back and went to law school. But we also had to go once a month, we had to go to a weekend training in a National Guard or Reserve unit. And so we were all subject to being called up. And so, in fact, we were a bunch of us in the law school watching Lyndon Johnson came on. He announced that he was calling up, 100,000, 200, I've forgotten what it was, but we all knew. We didn't know if we were going to, unit's going to be called up or not, or it might be called up 6 months from now. So that was all hanging over people's heads. There were just so many things going on then.
You mentioned Gerald Blessey earlier. As I recall, he had a Asian vacation compliments on Uncle Sam, didn't he?
I think he did. I can't keep straight. I was in a reserve village. I was in a reserve unit in Tupelo, but then in the summer we would have to go for 2 weeks to Fort Benning. But anyway, I would imagine Gerald went to Vietnam. It wouldn't be I just don't know exactly what happened.
He did. I've actually spoken with him about that before.
Yeah. And of course
But you had people that really had been around, and then expect Ross Barnett, expecting to believe it. No, they weren't buying that.
Yeah. And we could talk about this probably forever, but
we could.
But before we go, just real quick, I want to at least touch on one additional story. After you graduated from Ole Miss Law School, you were I think you clerked for a state judge and for a federal judge. The federal judge was J.P. Coleman, who also served as governor of Mississippi. And then you were elected to the legislature yourself, I guess, representing Hinds County and the Jackson area. You were elected to the Senate, and so you served 2 terms in the Senate. Your first term was during the Cliff Finch administration, which was I guess 76 to 80. I may be getting and then you served the next term. William Winter was governor, and of course during that term, Governor Winter pushed education reform, and you were there to vote for one of the landmark pieces of legislation that has come across, I guess, in the history of the state, the Education Reform Act of '82. Can you talk a little bit about how your vote transpired that day? I just thought it was a neat story.
Well, I was on into my 40s by then, and of all things, I wound up being diagnosed with chicken pox. A grown man with chicken pox. And I was having to stay home, one, because that chicken pox would give you these horrible migraine headaches and this, that, and the other. And it went on for maybe a week or more.
Yeah, I understand as you get older, the symptoms are worse with chicken pox.
It was bad. And then they had the education reform bill come up for a vote in the Senate, and the vote was really, really close. And so they needed every vote they could get. And so Con Maloney was one of the other senators from Hinds County, and he called and told me I just had to come vote. So, okay. So he came and got me, and then, but that chicken pox is highly contagious. Nobody wouldn't risk getting it. So Con did come. Maybe he's had it. I don't know what it was. But anyway, he came and got me and took me to the Capitol, I believe, and might have had my wife Theda gone with us. But anyway, they opened up the back doors and got me on the elevators, and they wouldn't let me on the floor of the Senate. But they got me up in the balcony, and everybody agreed to let me vote from up in the balcony. And so I did vote. But then it turned out we lost by 1 or 2 votes. So, but anyway, that made the national, strange, I guess so weird. Anyway, it made the national news on that. It was in newspapers around the country. But the funny part about it, we didn't know at the time a couple of real good friends of ours were in New Mexico, Arizona, somewhere. And apparently that had a little squabble during travel, like people will be when they travel. And they were just the two of them in a car driving across the desert and not talking to each other, and had the radio on and listening just to music. And all of a sudden, the 5-minute news break came on, and they heard in Arizona that Edward Ellington, their good friend, had the chicken pox and lost his vote. They started laughing with each other, and then the trip went on well from there. But anyway,
so
I hadn't heard of any more chicken pox votes since that day.
So that was the education format eventually passed during that December special session. That was the vote during the regular session?
Yes, yeah, it failed in the regular session,
yeah.
But we did the special session. I think that's one of the last votes I cast.
That's a great story. So I was I think a mutual friend, Bob Davidson, who was an attorney for the state senate. He works part time now. He's technically retired. But he always come back and help.
I know him well. He was there working when I was there.
Yeah, but I was asking him about that story. He said he pointed up in the gallery. He said, "Yeah, he stood right there." And he said he stood right there and voted. But
Judge, we appreciate you talking with us, and this subject could go on through 3 or 4 podcasts. We may have to get you back, but I'm curious. One kind of final question I have is. Did you ever see Robert Kennedy again? I know if I recall correctly, he made a famous tour through the Delta the following year, 67 maybe. I'm curious, number one, did you ever meet or see him again? And then number two, maybe your thoughts on I can imagine maybe it was a little more personal for you than a lot of others when you saw he had been assassinated.
No, I never saw him personally again. But as I said, I saw, and my wife and I visited for a couple of hours, I guess, with Ethel and her daughter, the daughter she had with her, Mary Courtney.
Yeah.
And she told me that she was glad for me to be there because, as I said, he was one of the few places he'd ever talked about speaking. And then Mary Courtney never really knew her father because she was so little when he got killed. And so she was real interested in just hearing somebody that had known him or talked to him, whatever you want to call it, to hear me talk about it. So that's the only connection I had. We got the school, Streets Bureau got a real nice letter of appreciation for one of his staff members, William Van Hoovel, who was part of his contingents in Good Law, New York lawyer. But I never got to see him again, and I just thought it was just tragic that he got killed. And I do believe, of course, never know, I do believe that if he had been elected president, other would have gotten out of Vietnam sooner, and a whole lot of people that got killed would not have been killed. But that's just one of those speculations.
Well, Judge, you can call Senator Bryan and blame him and cuss him for getting you on here, but we really appreciate it. The story is fascinating, and we appreciate your time, and just just appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking to somebody that had some familiarity with it, and I hope you can get Gerald, give Mary's contact, and maybe Ole Miss Libraries also, if anybody wants to hear it.
Sure.
Thank you all. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/theotherside. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganeshow. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.